The streets of Artonia pulsed with the chaotic hum of life. Neon signs flickered above narrow alleys, their colors bleeding onto rain-slicked pavement. 1,000 different languages overlapped in the air, snippets of conversation from humans and aliens alike, blending into an almost symphonic cacophony. Among the bustle, no one noticed a lone figure standing at the edge of the crowd, her silver hair glinting faintly under the streetlights. Leora clutched her thin shawl tightly around her shoulders. The fabric was barely adequate against the biting chill, but she had nothing else. Her delicate, iridescent skin, a hallmark of her sylvan heritage, shimmered faintly, a trait she had once been proud of but now wished she could hide. She had been discarded, a failure in the eyes of the human-run integration program, thrown out like garbage. Her breath came in shallow puffs as she watched people pass by, their faces illuminated by the glow of digital advertisements that loomed high above. No one met her gaze. No one slowed down. A human mother pulled her child closer as they walked past, the gesture slight but unmistakable. Leora's throat tightened. She had tried to fit in, tried to learn their ways, to speak their language, but it was never enough. The humans had judged her unworthy. "Keep moving, Sylvan," a gruff voice barked. A security officer leaned against a nearby wall, his uniform immaculate, his eyes cold. "This isn't a shelter." Leora nodded quickly and shuffled further into the shadows. She didn't want trouble. Not again. She sank onto the cold ground, knees tucked to her chest, and tried to make herself as small as possible. Her mind swirled with fragmented memories of her homeworld, lush, golden forests and skies that shimmered with light. It had been years since she had left, but the ache of longing hadn't dulled. She closed her eyes, willing the tears to stay hidden. "Hey," the voice startled her. It was rough, but not unkind. Leora's eyes snapped open, and she found herself staring into the face of a man crouching in front of her. His features were rugged, his dark hair flecked with streaks of gray. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either. His expression wasn't pitying, just curious. "You all right?" he asked. Leora hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer felt impossibly complex. "No place," she managed to say, her voice soft and hesitant. Her English was fractured, her Sylvan accent thick. The man frowned, his brow furrowing in a way that made him look stern but not unkind. "You got nowhere to go?" She shook her head, her silver hair falling across her face. She didn't trust herself to say more. The man sighed, glancing up and down the street. "Figures," he muttered. "The city's not exactly known for being welcoming, is it?" Leora didn't know how to respond, so she simply stared at him, unsure whether he was mocking her or sympathizing. To her surprise, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm and smelled faintly of engine oil and something earthy, something comforting. "Name's Doran," he said, straightening up and extending a hand. "Come on. Can't leave you out here to freeze." Leora stared at his hand, her heart pounding. It had been so long since anyone had shown her even a shred of kindness. She hesitated, but then her fingers brushed against his, and he helped her to her feet. The walk to Doran's apartment was short, but every step felt surreal to Leora. The streets grew quieter as they moved away from the main thoroughfare, the cacophony of the city fading into a low hum. Doran led her up a narrow staircase to a small, cluttered apartment above what appeared to be a repair shop. The sign outside was faded, the words barely legible. "Doran's Fix-It." The apartment itself was modest. A single room that served as both living space and kitchen, with a small cot tucked into one corner. Tools and parts littered the floor, and shelves sagged under the weight of mechanical gadgets. It was far from pristine, but it was warm. "Sit," Doran said, gesturing to a worn armchair near a battered table. He moved to a stove and began heating something in a small pot. "You hungry?" Leora nodded, her stomach twisting painfully at the mention of food. She hadn't eaten in what felt like days. Doran placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of her, along with a hunk of bread. The smell was intoxicating. and she didn't wait for permission before digging in. The soup was simple, vegetables and some kind of meat, but it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. "Slow down," Doran said with a chuckle. "You'll choke." She slowed, embarrassed, but her hunger wouldn't let her stop entirely. When she finally put down the spoon, her cheeks flushed with warmth, she whispered, "Thank you." Doran waved a hand dismissively. "Don't mention it. You look like you needed it." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "So, what's your story? How'd you end up on the streets?" Leora hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket he had given her. Explaining would mean revisiting her failures, her shame. But Doran's gaze wasn't prying, just patient. "Came for exchange," she began slowly, picking her words carefully. "Learn human ways. Fail. They say, not good enough. Send out." Doran frowned deeply, his lips pressing into a thin line. "That's rough," he said finally. "Doesn't seem fair. Throwing someone out just because they don't get everything right the first time." Leora shrugged. Fairness didn't seem to apply to her anymore. "Well," Doran said, clapping his hands together, "you're here now. That's what matters. You can stay for a bit, till you figure things out." Leora's eyes widened. "Stay?" "Yeah," Doran said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I've got a roof, you don't." Seems simple enough. Leora stared at him, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. No one had ever done something like this for her, not without expecting something in return. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The days that followed were unlike anything Leora had experienced before. Doran put her to work in the shop, showing her how to sort parts and clean tools. At first, her clumsiness frustrated her, and she fumbled with the unfamiliar gadgets. But Doran never lost his patience. "Everyone starts somewhere," he said when she accidentally tangled a bundle of wires. "You'll get the hang of it." And she did. Slowly but surely, Leora began to understand the basics. She learned to identify different components, to handle tools with care. Her hands, which had once been unsteady with uncertainty, grew more confident with each passing day. The work was hard, but it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as Doran struggled to fix a particularly stubborn device, a clunky old generator that had refused to hum to life, Leora found herself watching closely. She could feel the frustration radiating from Doran as he muttered under his breath, his tools clanking against the metal casing. "Let me try," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. Doran raised an eyebrow but stepped aside. Leora placed her hands on the generator, closing her eyes. Her Sylvan heritage allowed her to sense connections, to feel the way energy flowed through systems. Her fingers glowed faintly, a soft golden light pulsing from her fingertips. The generator whirred to life. Doran's jaw dropped. "What the? How did you do that?" Leora smiled shyly, pulling her hands back. "Sylvan touch. We feel connections." Doran let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. That's one hell of a skill." From that moment on, Leora became an integral part of the shop. Customers were amazed by her ability to repair machines with a mere touch, and word spread quickly. The once quiet shop became a bustling hub, with people lining up to see the alien mechanic. For the first time in her life, Leora felt valued. She had a place, a purpose, and it was all because one human had decided she was worth taking a chance on. As the weeks turned into months, the small shop transformed into a vibrant hub of activity. The once overlooked corner repair shop now drew a steady stream of customers, some curious about the Sylvan mechanic, others desperate for her unique touch to fix what no human could. Doran watched with quiet satisfaction as Leora became the heart of the operation. Her confidence grew with each successful repair, her smile becoming a more frequent visitor to her face. But not everyone welcomed Leora's success. The first sign of trouble came one chilly afternoon. Leora was at the workbench, her delicate fingers glowing faintly as she tinkered with a malfunctioning hoverboard. Dorian stood nearby, chatting with a customer about a plasma engine overhaul. The bell above the door jingled, and a group of 3 men entered. Their uniforms bore the insignia of the city's enforcement division, but their posture and the sneer on their leader's face made it clear they weren't here for repairs. "Busy little shop you've got here," the leader said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. His eyes locked onto Leora, narrowing slightly. "Word is you've got an alien working miracles." Dorian stepped forward, his expression hardening. "She's got a name. It's Leora. What do you want?" The man smirked, ignoring Dorian's question. "Didn't think it was legal for unregistered aliens to be running businesses." "She's not running it. She's helping me," Dorian replied, his tone firm. "And as far as I know, there's no law against that." The officer took a step closer, his gaze sweeping the room with feigned casualness. "Still, might be worth checking if she's got the proper permits. We wouldn't want any accidents." Leora felt a shiver run down her spine. She had faced hostility before, but this was different, calculated, menacing. She looked at Dorian, unsure of what to do. Dorian crossed his arms, his stance unwavering. "She's not breaking any laws. If you've got a problem, take it up with the council." The man's smirk faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. "We'll be keeping an eye on this place," he said, his voice low and threatening. With that, he turned and signaled for his companions to follow. As the door closed behind them, the tension in the room lingered like a bad smell. Dorian let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. "Idiots." Leora swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she set down the hoverboard. I should go," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dorian spun around, his eyes blazing. "Go? Are you kidding me? They're the ones who should back off, not you." "They will make trouble," Leora said, her voice tinged with fear. "For you, for the shop. Let them try," Dorian said fiercely. "This place doesn't run without you, Leora. They're just bullies trying to scare us. Don't give them the satisfaction." Leora looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and doubt in equal measure. She wanted to believe him, but years of rejection and fear weighed heavily on her. The next few weeks were tense. The officers didn't return, but their shadow loomed large. Customers sometimes glanced nervously at the door, and Leora couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Dorian tried to keep things as normal as possible, cracking jokes and reassuring her, but she could see the worry etched into his face. One night, long after the shop had closed, Leora sat by the small window, staring out at the city lights. Dorian was tinkering with a broken radio, his focus intense. The soft hum of the soldering iron filled the silence. "Why do you help me?" Leora asked suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. Dorian looked up, surprised by the question. He set the radio down and leaned back in his chair, considering his answer. "Because it's the right thing to do." Leora frowned. "Many humans do not think so. They see me as less. Well, they're idiots," Dorian said bluntly. "You've got as much right to be here as anyone else. Maybe more, considering the crap you've had to put up with." She looked at him, her luminous eyes searching his face. "Not everyone would agree. You risk much." Dorian shrugged. "What's the point of having a roof over your head if you can't use it to help someone who needs it?" Leora's lips curled into a small smile. "You are different." "Yeah, well," Dorian said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I've never been much good at fitting in myself. Guess we've got that in common." For the first time in years, Leora felt a flicker of hope, small and fragile, but real. One afternoon, the shop door burst open, and a young human boy stumbled in, clutching a broken drone. "Please," he gasped, his face pale. "You have to help. My dad's in trouble." Leora and Dorian exchanged a glance before hurrying to the boy's side. "What happened?" Dorian asked, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "The generator at the plant. It's failing," the boy said, his words tumbling out in a rush. Dad says if it doesn't get fixed, the whole district could lose power. They tried everything, but nothing's working. Doran glanced at Leora. You think you can handle this? Leora hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I will try. The boy led them to the plant, a massive industrial structure humming with barely contained energy. Workers milled about in a panic, their voices overlapping in a chaotic blur. Leora stepped forward, her presence immediately drawing attention. What's she doing here? One of the workers demanded. She's here to help, Doran snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. Leora approached the generator, her hands trembling slightly. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the machine fill her senses. The connections were weak, frayed in places, but not beyond repair. She placed her glowing hands on the metal, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the tension in the air palpable. Then, with a low hum, the generator roared back to life. Lights flickered, steadied, and then burned brightly. Cheers erupted around her, but Leora barely noticed. She stepped back, her legs shaky, and Doran caught her before she could collapse. You did it, he said, his voice filled with pride. The boy's father approached, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved us. For the first time, Leora felt something other than fear in the faces of the humans around her. She saw respect, maybe even acceptance. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she might truly belong. The following morning, the shop was unusually quiet. The hum of the city outside filtered in through the windows. But inside, a calm settled over Leora and Doran as they prepared for another day of work. The events at the plant had left Leora drained, but something deeper stirred within her, a newfound sense of purpose. As she swept the floor, the bell over the door jingled. Leora looked up, expecting a customer, but instead, she found herself face to face with one of the officers from weeks ago. This time, he was alone. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze lingered on her with an unsettling intensity. Doran appeared from the back room, his hands covered in grease. You lost? He asked, his voice sharp. The officer held up his hands in mock surrender. Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. Funny, that's exactly what you said last time. Doran shot back. Ignoring the jab, the officer turned his attention to Leora. You were at the plant yesterday. Leora stiffened, her grip tightening on the broom handle. Yes. Fixed the generator, didn't you? He asked, his tone neutral. Yes, she repeated, unsure of his intentions. The officer nodded slowly, as if processing her response. Words gotten around. Some people think you're a hero. I did what needed to be done, Leora said quietly, her luminous eyes meeting his. And others, the officer continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, think you're a liability, a danger to the balance we've got here. That's enough, Doran said, stepping between them. She's done nothing but help the city. If you're here to threaten her, you can walk right back out that door. The officer tilted his head, studying Doran. You've got guts. I'll give you that. But this isn't about you. He glanced back at Leora. There are people who don't want aliens getting too comfortable here. You do well to watch your back. Without waiting for a response, he turned and left, the door jingling shut behind him. Leora exhaled a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. He is right, she said softly. I do not belong here. Doran slammed a hand down on the counter, making her jump. Don't you dare say that, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. You've proven you're worth 100 times over. If they can't see that, it's their problem, not yours. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. But how long before their problem becomes ours? Over the next few days, the tension in the shop grew. While many customers expressed their gratitude for Leora's help, there were whispers, sidelong glances, and the occasional outright sneer. The air felt heavier, as though the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. One evening, as Doran locked up the shop, a rock sailed through the window, shattering the glass with a loud crash. Leora screamed, ducking behind the counter as Doran spun around, his eyes scanning the street. A group of figures disappeared into the shadows, their laughter echoing in the distance. "Cowards," Doran muttered under his breath. He turned to Leora, who was still crouched on the floor, her hands covering her head. "You okay?" She nodded, though her trembling hands betrayed her fear. "Why do they hate me so much?" Doran crouched beside her, his expression softening. "It's not you they hate. It's what you represent, change. And some people can't handle that. I never wanted to bring trouble to you," she said, her voice barely audible. "You didn't," he said firmly. "They're the ones causing trouble, and we're not going to let them win." The attack on the shop was just the beginning. Over the next few days, they found graffiti scrawled across the storefront, hateful messages that made Leora's stomach churn. Customers became fewer, and those who still came avoided looking her in the eye. The vibrant energy that had once filled the shop was replaced with an oppressive silence. Despite it all, Doran refused to back down. He spent hours repairing the broken window, scrubbing off the graffiti, and reassuring Leora that they would get through this. But Leora could see the strain in his eyes, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. One night, as they sat in the dimly lit shop, Leora spoke the word she had been dreading. "Maybe I should leave." Doran looked up sharply, his brow furrowing. "What?" "This place is your home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your life. I do not want to ruin it." "You're not ruining anything," he said, his voice rising. "Don't you see? You're the best thing that's happened to the shop to me. Letting them scare you off would be the real loss." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "I cannot stay if it puts you in danger." Doran reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. "We're in this together, Leora. Whatever comes, we'll face it. I'm not giving up on you, so don't give up on yourself." For the first time in days, Leora felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could weather the storm together. In the weeks following the attack on the shop, Leora and Doran worked tirelessly to reclaim the sense of normalcy they had fought so hard to build. The shattered window was repaired and the hateful graffiti scrubbed clean. Despite the challenges, the two of them continued to work side by side, drawing strength from one another. But the tension in the city lingered, an ever-present reminder of how fragile their peace was. One day, as they were opening the shop, an unfamiliar customer walked in. He was tall with a sharp, commanding presence. His attire was understated, but carried an air of authority. He surveyed the room before his gaze settled on Leora. "You're the one they call the alien mechanic," he said, his tone even but curious. Leora hesitated, unsure whether to confirm or deny it. Before she could respond, Doran stepped forward. "Who's asking?" The man offered a faint smile. "My name is Kareth. I'm an advocate for interspecies cooperation. I've been following your story, Leora." Leora blinked in surprise. "You have?" Kareth nodded. "Word travels fast in the city. Some see you as a threat, but others recognize the potential you represent. A bridge between our worlds." Doran crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "And what does that have to do with us?" "I believe Leora's actions at the power plant were just the beginning," Kareth said. "With her skills and resilience, she could play a crucial role in fostering understanding between humans and other alien refugees. But for that to happen, she needs protection and a platform." Leora frowned. "I do not want to be a symbol. I just want to live in peace." "And you should have that right," Kareth agreed. "But peace isn't just given, it's built. If you're willing, I'd like to help you take the first steps towards something greater." The conversation with Kareth stayed with Leora long after he left. She found herself torn between the desire to fade into obscurity and the realization that her presence in the city had already made an impact, whether she wanted it to or not. Doran, ever her steadfast supporter, Listen patiently as she voiced her fears. "What if I fail?" she asked one evening as they sat in the dimly lit shop. "You won't," Doran said without hesitation. "You cannot know that," she replied, her luminous eyes filled with uncertainty. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What I do know is that you've already proven more than anyone could have asked. You've faced down hatred, helped people who didn't deserve it, and stayed true to yourself. If anyone can handle this, it's you." His words gave her the courage she needed to make a decision. The next day, she sought out Kareth and agreed to work with him, on the condition that Doran could remain by her side. Kareth wasted no time. He introduced Leora to a small but growing network of advocates who were working to improve relations between humans and alien refugees. They organized public demonstrations, gave speeches, and hosted workshops to dispel myths and foster empathy. At first, Leora was nervous about speaking in front of crowds, but she quickly discovered that her honesty and vulnerability resonated with people. She spoke about her experiences, about the struggles of being an outcast and the small acts of kindness that had made all the difference. Each time she stepped onto a stage, she felt a little stronger, a little more certain of her place in the world. The backlash was inevitable. Protesters showed up at her events, shouting slurs and waving signs. But Leora refused to back down, and neither did Doran, who stood by her side every step of the way. Their resilience inspired others, and slowly, the tide began to turn. One evening, as they walked home from an event, Leora and Doran found themselves surrounded by a group of hooded figures. The alley was dark, the air thick with tension. "You've caused enough trouble," one of them snarled, stepping forward with a lead pipe in hand. Doran moved to shield Leora, but she stopped him with a gentle touch. "No," she said softly. "This is my fight." The leader sneered. "What are you going to do, alien? Fix us with your tools?" Leora took a deep breath, her luminous eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "I will not fight you, but if you truly believe I am a threat, then you must fear me. And if you fear me, perhaps you should ask yourselves why." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The hooded figures hesitated, their bravado faltering. One by one, they lowered their weapons and retreated into the night, leaving Leora and Doran alone in the alley. Doran let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over him. "Remind me never to doubt you." Leora smiled faintly. "You never have." Months passed, and the city began to change. The efforts of Leora, Kareth, and their allies bore fruit as more humans opened their hearts to their alien neighbors. The shop became a symbol of unity, a place where people of all species could gather and share their stories. One day, as Leora worked on a particularly stubborn engine, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was the officer who had warned her to watch her back. This time, his expression was softer, almost apologetic. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I let fear cloud my judgment, but seeing what you've done, it's opened my eyes." Leora straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. "It is not too late to change," she said simply. The officer nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you." As he left, Doran walked over, a proud grin on his face. "You're changing the world, Leora." She shook her head. "No, we are." Together, they looked out at the bustling street, where humans and aliens walked side by side. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, Leora felt like she truly belonged.